Reports continue of a brutal crackdown in Iran amid a near total communications blackout as protesters continue to oppose the country's authoritarian regime. This as the Trump administration weighs how to respond after the president last week suggested there would be dire consequences if the regime cracked down on the people.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel. The topic this week, the prospects for a country that has suffered nearly 50 years under an Islamist regime. And joining us is an expert you can totally trust on this topic, Mark Dubowitz, the CEO of the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. Mark, so much is going on in this busy week, so we thank you for taking a moment to share your deep knowledge here.
Honored to be on. Thanks, Kimberly.
Well, I want to ask you, we have seen similar Iranian uprisings. I mean, Iranians have been out on the street effectively off and on in smaller or larger numbers since 2009. Some of them have been quite large protests. These current ones appear to have been sparked by economic turmoil, although Iranians have plenty of other legitimate grievances. The regime, which has imposed this communications blackout, is trying to suggest terrorists are fomenting the uproar, which is, of course, complete nonsense. By some estimates, they have already killed thousands of people for taking part. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, how is what is happening in Iran right now? How does it compare with some of these past periods of unrest? And alongside that, how does the regime's response to them compare?
So, Kimberly, it's unprecedented. I mean, unprecedented in scope, scale, intensity, as well as the people who are out on the streets, the really diversity of this coalition. You've seen in the past, as you mentioned, 2009, which was the Green Revolution, when middle-class North Tehranis were on the street after the fraudulent re-election of then Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and they were, saying, "Where's my vote?" And they were really talking about political reform. You saw protests in 2017, 18, 19, whereas blue-collar workers were on the streets saying, "Where's my paycheck?" in response to a crumbling economy. And they were talking more also about regime change. And that really then blew up in 2022, 2023, when Iranian women took to the streets in protesting against gender apartheid and forced hijab. And they were saying, where's my political and social freedom? Now on the streets are all of those groups and more. People who are blue collar workers, lower class, middle class, upper middle class, Tehran, as well as all 31 provinces. In the past, the people that were really taking the streets often were non-Persians. They were Kurds, they were Arabs, they were Baluchis, they were in the periphery, not in the heartland. Now in Tehran and across all major Iranian cities and provinces, there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. It's hard to judge this, of Iranians from all walks of life who've taken to the streets. And the other thing that which is why this is different, is the scale of brutality and slaughter from the regime. The regime understands that this is an existential moment for the Islamic Republic, and they are turning their guns on protesters and slaughtering them in ways that are, at least in number and scale, are unprecedented.
I think one question a lot of people have, I know I certainly have, is that, when we see these, obviously an enormous amount of this is kind of passions boiling over, and there's a spontaneous element to it, as you say, like in terms of the people that are out on the street. But is there much of an actual formalized opposition there? Are there people that are helping to kind of encourage people to go do this internally? Or is this just folks feeding off of one another? Is there any coordination or sort of structure to the opposition?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, I don't think there's one opposition. There's a number of oppositions. And again, that's based on, where they are geographically. There are different opposition movements. There's no opposition leader. If there was, and we knew his name or her name, they'd be dead already. And the opposition and the protest would be over. So I think the strength of this protest movement is that it's not dependent on one person. It's not dependent on one organizational, formal hierarchical structure. It really is dynamic in that sense. And that's why the regime is having such a difficult time putting these protests down. I think the person that has emerged from the outside, and it has to be somebody from the outside at this point, because that's the only way they'd stay alive, is Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the late Shah of Iran He's been in exile for decades. He's operating out of the Washington, D.C. area. And really, he has emerged as one of the most high profile and I think articulate spokespersons for the opposition. And the response from the street, not only in social media before the internet was taken off, but also on the street in terms of cries for Pahlavi to return, I think underscores that he is emerging as the most prominent opposition leader from the outside.
Is he acting in that regard? And this is a big question I have about him, because we are hearing his name a lot these days, and he clearly is somewhat central to a motivating force in this. But are people viewing him as a sort of figurehead and an inspirational figure in terms of freedoms and sort of democracy, or rather as a return of a monarchy?
So he has been very clear over decades that he wants to lead a transition and be a transitional figure inside Iran to transition Iran to a democracy, to a free, prosperous, and democratic Iran. He has never spoken about the restoration of the authoritarian monarchy that the Shah of Iran, his father, ruled over. There are elements of his camp who I think sort of long for that. And interestingly, I think Iranians, because this is a Gen Z opposition. This is a Gen Z uprising. These are young Iranians who did not live under the Shah, have no living memory of what it was like, but see the photos and the images and the films for what life was like under the Shah. And they see a much more prosperous, much more open, at least socially, a much more free Iran. And they would certainly prefer that to what they have right now under the mullahs.
Let's talk a little bit about the United States and what it can and should be doing here. And I actually want to begin with the opposite. Donald Trump has, talked about, he's certainly leveled some threats. We're all waiting to see what that means in terms of action, if anything. But before we get to what he maybe should be doing, what would your advice about what he should not be doing? I mean, for instance, one thing the Iranian leaders are asking for, suddenly they want negotiations over a new nuclear deal. That, to me, I'd like to get your thoughts, but it strikes me as a ruse designed to sort of buy them some time, extract themselves, give themselves some political legitimacy. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether or not Trump should go down that road. And if not, what are some of the other things he should avoid doing?
So going down that road would be catastrophic for U.S. national security, certainly for the Iranian people. But the regime has always played this game, and the only place that they've ever beaten America is at the negotiating table. They ran circles around Obama, they ran circles around Biden, and again, President Trump's a tough negotiator, but I think they are asking for negotiations clearly because their back is up against the wall, looking for a way out of this, and they're looking to forestall American action, and then they'll just kill their way through this uprising. There'll be, tens of thousands of dead Iranians, and there they will be at the negotiating table once again, smiling because they've got another American president who's walked right into their trap. The other element of that is they refuse to even meet President Trump's minimum demands, which is the full dismantlement of their nuclear missile programs and terror networks. And, already they're even saying publicly they refuse to even meet the minimum demand, which is no enrichment. So negotiations are fruitless. It's a way for the regime to buy time, to divide the American polity, to divide the U.S. from our European allies. He should definitely not be doing that. I think rhetorically, he early on was using this language. He no longer is, but he should never call these members of the opposition rioters. They're not rioting. They're protesting. Yeah. He should also, and I think, again, his language has been changing on this, but he talked early on about the fact that people were dying because they were being trampled to death in the protests. Well, there may be some people getting trampled. The vast majority of the thousands have been mowed down by the Iranian security forces, who've been facing these security forces mostly unarmed. So again, rhetoric matters. It matters tremendously. I think he also, as he considers his strike options, and we'll find out in the coming maybe hours and days what he's going to do, it has to be something meaningful. It has to be something public. It has to be something that actually the United States admits to, because that is what's going to bolster Iranians on the streets, and that's what's going to give them the continued courage to go out there in these mass numbers while they're facing potential death. So that's important. And then he can do many things covertly. The U.S. alone, the U.S. in cooperation with Israel, there's much that can be done covertly, cyber, information operations, other covert actions. But there has to be something big and public and emboldening.
Let's go through some of those other things that he can do. I mean, one really obvious one, and it seems as though the president has already taken some steps, is trying to do something in this regard. Reports are that he reached out to Elon Musk about restoring Starlink communications. Is there any sign there that is helping or could help more? I mean, is there anything else that can be done to aid Iranians, not just with communications between themselves, but also to help get some more info to the outside world about what exactly the brutality the regime is taking?
Yeah, so that's absolutely critical. Certainly necessary, but I wouldn't say sufficient condition of what the president needs in a plan. And the reason it's very important is I'm sure, as your listeners know, the regime immediately shut down the internet. They shut down cell service. They even shut down fixed line service, because what they want to do is kill Iranians in the dark. And they want to make sure that the videos that we've been seeing are not coming out of Iran. So what's left is Starlink. And the regime has been using military grade technology that I believe they got from China or Russia or both in order to jam the Starlink connection. So it's very important that Elon Musk and Starlink, along with the US government and potentially the Israelis, are working hard in order to ensure that they can restore that connection and use a technology infrastructure that's been developed in order to help facilitate communications. Otherwise, there'll be no videos coming out. The Iranians won't be able to communicate internally. If you can't communicate, you can't mobilize. If you can't mobilize, you can't protest. So they certainly need that capability.
Absolutely critical. I also wanted to ask you about the energy sector. There are oil sanctions on Iran, but one of the big problems, and I think a lot of people don't always realize, is the Biden administration didn't really enforce them. And I think we kind of, the Trump administration generally has a view that this should be limited in what they can export to not more than, I think, maybe like 100,000 barrels a day, but they're doing, I believe, far in excess of that. And if you think about it, if you just step back, it's doubly insulting, because not only are they, illegally selling this oil and evading sanctions, but presumably the money is then being used to fund this killing that we have going on at the moment. We've gotten pretty decent, it seems, at seizing oil tankers. See Venezuela. I mean, should we be doing the same here? Is this another option? And how effective or important is that?
So it's triply insulting, because most of that oil is going to the Chinese Communist Party, which is buying it at a steep discount. And I think estimates are somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 2 million barrels a day. So that's far from what the Trump administration has publicly said as a target, which you're right, 100,000 barrels is what they've set. And by the way, that's what they had reached during the first Trump administration. I think they were at about 100,000, 200,000 barrels a day. Listen, it's the key financial lifeline of the regime. To be able to cripple that is critical. I think Trump's announcement yesterday, threatening 25% tariffs against anybody doing business with Iran, was really important. I mean, it's interesting. We always talked about sanctions. I've spent 22 years working on sanctions, but Trump's tariff policy may not have necessarily the right benefits from a trade perspective. I'm not an expert in that. I'm sure the Wall Street Journal spent a lot of time debating that.
We have.
But from an economic financial warfare perspective, it's actually quite interesting, because if you think about it, what's really going to get the Chinese, and by the way, the Indians, the Emiratis, the Turks, others who are continuing to do business with Iran, to really wake up? It's going to be a combination of sanctions enforcement and the imposition of tariffs if they don't cut their business ties with the regime in Iran. So it's absolutely critical. We've got to, it's a way to weaken the regime in Iran, and it's a way to weaken the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing. That sounds like a good two-for to me.
Yeah, that brings up another thing. Are our allies doing enough? Should we be pushing to do more, on the sanctions front, or tariffs or in other ways?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, look, our allies, and here we're talking about our allies in Europe and in Asia mostly. It's a mixed bag. I mean, I think the Europeans, they like to send out, they're virtue signaling right now on Twitter about how horrible this all is. The EU could take significant steps like designating the Islamic Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. They refuse to do that. Even our British allies have refused to do that. That would be a big step. They could expel the quote diplomats that are in their capitals working out of the embassies. Those aren't diplomats, those are spies working with the IRGC and the Ministry of Intelligence. Throw out all those quote ambassadors and diplomats out of their capitals, and really for in a profound way say, Khamenei, you are now fully diplomatically isolated. I think our Asian allies could do the same. Certainly those who continue to do business with Iran, in the Singaporeans and others, again, need to cut that business. And the Australians, the Canadians, even some of our Latin American allies, again, in joining an international coalition of political isolation, economic isolation, diplomatic isolation. Those are important steps they can take, not only in support of the Iranian people, but to really send a message to Khamenei and the IRGC that continued slaughter of Iranians are going to lead to their global isolation.
Yeah, it's always shocking to me that hasn't happened already, but I'll put that aside. Let's talk about the military. I mean, you talked about big, bold, aggressive, something public that you take credit for. I want to know what you think about the notion of military strikes. And I mean, I'm assuming you agree with me that it's utterly ridiculous, the argument, the regime some are making that to take an action like that would somehow inspire the Iranian people to suddenly change their minds and throw in with the regime against, the great Satan. That always seems to me a counterproductive argument. But is there, I guess my question is more efficacy. Is there actually a way to do some sort of strikes that made a difference? There's a lot of bad guys there. The IRGC, as you've mentioned, the Basij, which is their militia. There are reports, you would know this better than I, that they have brought in, thugs from Iraq, Hezbollah and Shiite militia. Could you do a sort of decapitation strike? Could you take out Khamenei? Could you take out other people on the top? And would it actually what would it accomplish if you did it?
Yeah, I just want to just briefly address this sort of rally around the flag nonsense that we've been hearing, not only in the media and in social media, but also from policymakers and intelligence officials. I mean, the notion that a regime that is slaughtering Iranians on the streets today, that if the United States intervenes, the people being slaughtered by that regime are all of a sudden going to flip and are now going to support the regime, is what I called on X the other day for the first time I ever since joining X in 2009, when it was formerly known as Twitter. And I've never used profanity in 17 years. I called that argument.
Good for you.
And I don't want to use profanity on your show, so I'll just use the initials. I called that argument BS, absolute BS, because it absolutely is. And it really infuriates me that there are even members of this administration currently contemplating that as a legitimate argument. It's ridiculous. In fact, it's been ridiculous historically. I mean, when President Trump killed Qasem Soleimani, the vast majority of Iranians didn't rally around the flag. When he joined Israel in the 12-Day War and took out Iran's nuclear program, there was not a rally around the flag. There hasn't been a rally around the flag when the U.S. has imposed crippling sanctions, dating back 20 years. Iranians blame the regime. They don't blame America. So I just want to put that argument to rest once and for all as we contemplate what we should be doing. What should we be doing? Yeah, I mean, what we should be doing clearly is the kind of strikes that go at the regime's repression apparatus. I think it's very important that we demonstrate to Iranians, both symbolically and operationally, that we are willing to take out those who are murdering them. And that's IRGC and Basij, Ministry of Intelligence, the law enforcement forces, the even members of the Artesh, the people on the ground who've been killing Iranians over the past not only 2 weeks, but over the past 47 years. the Israelis actually, and Kimberly, you probably remember this, but the last day of the 12-day war, Israeli fighter jets were over Tehran, and they were minutes away from dropping bombs on hundreds, if not 1,000, members of the Basij militia. And right before that, the bombs were to fly, President Trump ordered Israeli fighter jets back to their bases, and that mission was not concluded. But Israel demonstrated, even in those waning days, a willingness and a intelligence dominance that allowed them to go after this repression apparatus. So they were going after IRGC, Ministry of Intelligence. They even took the Islamic Republic of Iran broadcasting network offline. This is the state propaganda media outlet that is really the only thing operating right now in Iran. So there are many targets. I'm sure our Israeli friends have a rich and deep target bank that they are sharing with Central Command and with the CIA and NSA. And so there's a lot that can be done. The other thing that I throw in, which is, it sounds like a bit of a long throw from third, but I think it's really important that the United States go after Iran's ballistic missile capability.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. And I think for a few important reasons. One, it is the most dangerous capability that the regime today retains after their nuclear program has been dismantled. Two is, speaking of our Israeli friends are going to hit that at some point. And we can do much more damage to those deeply buried ballistic missile silos and inventory than the Israelis can. And we can and should do it. Third is, since they're going to do it anyway, better we do it than the Israelis do it, and we're then implicated in a more significant war between Iran and Israel. We're going to get involved anyway. We should do it and do it properly. Fourth, and finally, is I think would send a message to the Iranians on the street, that the United States has the will, the capabilities to take out the most important and most dangerous strategic asset that the regime has today, and do that in combination with going after the repression apparatus. That's a serious U.S. action that I think will have both symbolic and material impact.
If you really went after that repression regime and you successfully managed to wipe out some of the people at the top, would that be enough breathing room to actually bring the regime down, to give the opposition the minute that they needed to finally topple it?
So I don't think anyone knows. I'm hearing a lot of reports from the intelligence community in the U.S. and Israel and around the world. Obviously, think tank experts, people inside and outside the administration. Everybody's trying to assess what it would take, how secure is the regime, and are we days, weeks, months away from regime collapse, or is this regime going to hang on for the next 50 years? I think anybody who is confident in that assessment doesn't understand anything, and because I don't think any of us know. And I think, there's many examples of that in history. Most recent example is nobody predicted the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody. And it came as a complete shock to the intelligence community and to Syria experts and to everybody around the world. So no one knows. I do think this regime has 9 lives and has demonstrated that over 47 years. I think they got 1 life left. I think they're on life 9. So I think it's just a matter of time before the regime ends up in, what Ronald Reagan called the ash heap of history. I think they've never been weaker. They're facing just, a myriad of threats internally, externally, massive crises, economic, environmental, water. Certainly they've seen their axis of resistance, as they call it. I call it the axis of misery. This sort of terror proxy network, severely degraded by the Israelis, their nuclear program, their ballistic missile program, cut in half, and now these massive protests. So never been weaker since 79. I think it's a matter of time before they go down. I couldn't predict. I don't think anyone could when that'll occur.
Well, I actually applaud the wisdom of your humility, because to say that that anyone could say they know with certainty any of this is craziness. But I want to just close this out by picking up what you just mentioned, this regime on 9 Lives, and ask you a little thought experiment. It's actually been 50 years now almost that this regime has been in place. If they were to fall, what does the country look like after that? What does the region look like without an Islamist regime at the head of Iran? I'm be fascinated to hear your thoughts.
So I think the obvious part of the answer is if they were to fall and be replaced by a better regime, and we can talk about what better means in multiple ways, I think it has a profound impact on the Middle East and on U.S. national security, because, look, this is a regime that has killed and maimed thousands of Americans, Israelis, and hundreds of thousands of Middle Easterners. It has been the regime most responsible for the bloodshed and chaos in the Middle East over the past 5 decades, certainly over the past 2 decades. If this regime were to go away, I don't think the entire Middle East would look like Dubai. Because I think you've got, the Islamists in Turkey. You still have, Salafist remnants. You certainly have, radical Shiite groups and radical Sunni groups. So it would still be a complicated regime, a complicated Middle East, but I think it would be profoundly better. I also think that, if it is a free, democratic, and prosperous Iran, it's going to be really a force for stability. And a close U.S. ally, close Israeli ally. I think the countries that don't want to see a free and prosperous Iran today, ironically, are like the Saudis, the Qataris, those governments in the Middle East who don't want to see Iranians running a democracy and elections and a very powerful, prosperous country in the region. So I think that those countries would prefer a weak, enfeebled, regime that is not exporting terror, but is not exporting democracy or exporting freedom and prosperity. So it still remains a complicated Middle East, but I would say it's just profoundly important for America that we get rid of the Islamic Republic. And I do think for the biggest reason, and that is we have to focus our resources on a multi-generational struggle against the Chinese Communist Party, not just in the Indo-Pacific, where we have important allies like Japan and Taiwan and others, and obviously very important strategic and economic interests, but also in the Middle East. We want to be on the side of the Iranian people, the Israelis, the Emiratis, and others in countering Chinese influence in the Middle East, which is probably the second most important strategic area where we need to counter the CCP. So very, very important that we get rid of the Islamic Republic. I think it'll happen. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I'm confident it will. I think, as Reagan said, it was inevitable that Marxism, Leninism would end up on the ash heap of history. It is equally inevitable that Khomeinism and Khameneism, the 2 supreme leaders of Iran, and the Islamic Republic end up on the same ash heap. Reagan knew it would happen. I'm confident it will. We got to have the right policy and the right commitment to make it happen.
Well, I hope fervently that comes to pass, and very, very soon, mostly so that the Iranian people themselves can escape from this current mayhem and bloodshed. Mark, we want to thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us this week. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in. We are here every week. If you like the show, please do hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to us, you can at atkim@wsj.com.